Welcome to my channel, where every story pulls you into a new mystery. Every case tests your instincts, and every clue brings us one step closer to the truth. In today's case, we travel with Hercule Poirot to a land where the sun blazes, the wind whispers, and the sand hides more than just fossils. A body is found, buried beneath the ever-shifting dunes. No footsteps, no weapon, no witnesses, just silence and secrets, but in a place where even the ground cannot stay still. Poirot must rely on one thing that never changes: human nature. Stay with me till the end, because this mystery isn't just about where the killer hid. It's about who they truly are. So, pick up your cup of tea and get comfortable, because today's case will leave you guessing until the very last grain of sand falls. Chapter 1. The mysterious disappearance. The sun had barely set over the vast expanse of the Sahara Desert, casting a dull orange hue across the sand dunes as the luxurious train slowly rumbled to a stop. The train station, isolated and almost forgotten in the middle of nowhere, was a place where time seemed to stand still, a place where the world's most elite travelers gathered for a brief respite. It was a stopover on a grand tour for the wealthy, who had come from the farthest corners of the earth to witness the awe-inspiring landscapes of the desert. It was the perfect setting for a crime, one that no one could have predicted, least of all the passengers aboard the train. The Desert Oasis Hotel, a sprawling colonial-style building, stood at the foot of the dunes, bathed in the soft glow of evening. Its high, arched windows overlooked the vast stretch of golden sand, where the only movement was the occasional whisper of the wind shifting the dunes. Guests in their finest attire lingered on the hotel's terrace, sipping champagne and engaging in idle chatter about the breathtaking scenery. The mood was relaxed, though an undercurrent of tension lay beneath the surface, unspoken but palpable. Among the guests was none other than Hercule Poirot, the famed Belgian detective, who had been invited to the desert by an old acquaintance to enjoy a short holiday. Despite his desire for rest, Poirot was ever alert, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings, his mind constantly at work, even in the most peaceful of environments. He sat at the edge of the terrace, his fingers lightly tapping on the armrest of his chair. As he observed the other guests, the evening took an unexpected turn when a sudden commotion broke out near the hotel's entrance. Poirot, who had been quietly pondering the mysteries of the human mind, was immediately drawn to the disturbance. A young woman, panic-stricken and breathless, rushed towards the entrance, her voice trembling with fear. I can't find him," she cried out, her face pale and her hands trembling. "He's gone. My father is gone." It was clear from the woman's reaction that something serious had happened, though no one knew yet what it was. The other guests exchanged worried glances, and the staff at the hotel looked confused and alarmed. Poirot stood, his expression unreadable, as he made his way toward the young woman. "I am afraid I must inquire as to the details of this disappearance," Poirot said, his voice calm yet commanding. "What exactly has occurred?" The woman, who was no older than 25, blinked through her tears. "My father, Professor Richard Marlowe. He was standing on the balcony, looking out at the dunes. He was so fascinated by the desert, always talking about its secrets, and then he simply vanished. He was there one moment, and the next, nothing, just an empty spot in the sand." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind already beginning to piece together the situation. He motioned for the woman to calm herself. "Tell me, mademoiselle, what exactly happened before your father's disappearance? Was there anyone nearby?" The woman, still shaken, shook her head. "No, he was alone. I had been inside, talking to some of the other guests. It was only when I stepped out to join him that I found him gone. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints, nothing. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air." Poirot's brow furrowed, his mind working with incredible speed. A disappearance in such a desolate place, with no signs of disturbance or struggle, could mean only one thing. Something far more complex was at play. "I will assist you in solving this mystery, Mademoiselle," Poirot said, his voice steady. "But first, I must examine the scene where your father was last seen. Lead the way." As they walked toward the balcony, Poirot took note of the guests milling round, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. The wind had picked up, and the sky above was now painted in shades of deep purple and red, the last remnants of daylight slowly fading into night. The balcony overlooked a sweeping view of the dunes, and the scent of the desert air was thick with the promise of impending change. Upon reaching the balcony, Poirot knelt down, his sharp eyes scanning the sand below. There were no signs of a struggle, no disturbed earth, no objects displaced. The ground was untouched, save for a few scattered footprints from earlier guests. Poirot stood up slowly, his mind racing through possible scenarios. He observed the surrounding area, looking for any hidden clues, any sign that might reveal what had transpired. "There are no marks in the sand," Poirot muttered to himself, almost as if speaking to the wind. "No footprints, no drag marks. It is as if Professor Marlowe simply vanished." He turned to the woman. "Mademoiselle, tell me, was there anything unusual about your father's behavior before this event?" The woman hesitated, her brow furrowing in thought. "Nothing unusual, no. He had been a little obsessed with the idea of the shifting dunes, talking about how they hide secrets and treasures. But that's just ridiculous, isn't it?" Poirot's eyes flicked to the horizon, where the dunes stretched endlessly into the distance. There was something intriguing about her father's fascination with the desert. Poirot was certain that the professor had not just disappeared by accident. No, there was something deeper, more intentional at work. He turned back to the woman, his expression one of quiet determination. "Mademoiselle, I believe that your father's disappearance is not as simple as it seems. It is not the work of chance or an accident. There are forces at play here, forces that you may not yet understand." He paused for a moment, as though allowing his words to settle before continuing. "I will need to speak with the other guests, examine their behavior, and study any connections they may have with your father. There's much more to this mystery than meets the eye." As the woman nodded, still wide-eyed with fear, Poirot stood tall and surveyed the horizon once more. The shifting sand dunes seemed to whisper to him, their secrets hidden beneath layers of history, time, and desert winds. The game had begun, and Hercule Poirot was ready to play. Chapter 2. The first cool evening air had settled in, sweeping across the balcony as Poirot paced thoughtfully, his sharp gaze scanning every inch of the scene. The wind shifted the sand slightly, but nothing disturbed the perfect stillness of the place. He was no stranger to mysteries, but this one felt different, more elusive, more tangled in secrets. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began, his voice calm yet commanding, "tell me, did your father have any enemies? Was there anyone who might have wanted to harm him?" The young woman's face darkened, her thoughts clearly drifting to memories she would have rather forgotten. She shook her head slowly, a trace of fear lingering in her eyes. "No, I don't think so. Father was well-liked, I suppose. He was always so focused on his work, his research. His passion was the desert, the dunes. They fascinated him. He spent more time out here than with anyone else." Poirot nodded, his mind already turning over the implications of her words. There was nothing overtly suspicious in her response, but there were subtle layers to consider. A man with a singular obsession, particularly one as arcane as the shifting dunes, could have hidden motivations, whether conscious or not, and obsession often led to dangerous consequences. "Your father, he was a professor, yes?" Poirot inquired further, hoping for more insight. "What was the nature of his studies?" She bit her lip, her thoughts clearly distant as she gathered her words. Yes, he was an archaeologist. He specialized in ancient desert civilizations. He often spoke about hidden ruins, lost treasures, and secrets buried under the sands. But it was all academic, you know? He never acted as though there was anything sinister about it. Poirot absorbed her words, his mind beginning to form a theory, though he remained silent. The professor's obsession with the desert dunes at once romantic and dangerous could hold the key to his disappearance. As the wind picked up, Poirot's gaze shifted across the surrounding landscape. He wasn't just looking for signs in the sand. He was examining human nature itself, how people responded under pressure, how they manipulated the truth, how they hid their guilt or fear behind masks of composure. Poirot motioned for the woman to accompany him to the front desk of the hotel. The search for clues, he knew, began with understanding the people who had been closest to the missing professor. Inside, the hotel's lobby was grand and opulent. The atmosphere had changed since the commotion. A slight unease now hung in the air. The staff had gone quiet, eyeing the woman nervously as she passed them by. The hotel manager, a tall man with thin features and a stern countenance, stood by the desk, watching the proceedings with concern. "Ah, Mademoiselle Marlowe," the manager greeted her with a faint smile, though there was no warmth in it. "Is there anything more we can do to assist?" The woman gave a shaky sigh. "My father, he's missing." The manager raised a hand, signaling her to stop. "I am well aware, mademoiselle. The authorities have already been contacted, and we've conducted our own search of the grounds. Nothing has turned up, not even his personal effects. No trace at all." Poirot stepped forward, his keen eyes locked on the manager. "I must ask you some questions, monsieur. It is important that I understand everything about the guests' movements today. It is imperative that I know who was near the balcony, near the dunes, who was aware of Professor Marlowe's obsession." The manager's expression faltered for a brief moment, and Poirot caught the flicker, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a professional smile. "Of course, monsieur. I'll gather all the relevant details." He turned to a nearby staff member, who immediately went to retrieve a guest list. Poirot glanced at the woman. "You mentioned earlier, mademoiselle, that your father spoke of the dunes often. But I must know, did he ever seem distressed by them? Did he speak of danger, or perhaps a discovery?" Mademoiselle Marlowe hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. He was always so focused on his research, but lately, he mentioned something strange. He said he had found something, not a ruin or treasure, something more elusive. He was excited, but also fearful. I didn't know what to make of it. I thought he was just indulging in one of his fantasies. The dessert does that to him. Poirot's mind raced. Fear mixed with excitement was a powerful combination, especially when it came to the prospect of discovery. Something about this puzzle was beginning to feel more ominous than it first appeared. A man obsessed with uncovering ancient secrets, finding something that could unsettle him. It was the sort of situation where he might disappear without a trace, and no one would know why. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, his voice soft but firm, "tell me, were there any guests who might have had reason to follow your father's research? Anyone who might be aware of his findings?" Her eyes widened as if the thought had never occurred to her. "Well, there were several archaeologists and historians among the guests, fellow academics, you know. But I didn't see any of them talking to my father directly. They were all busy with their own affairs." Poirot gave a short nod, mentally noting her words. His suspicion deepened. An academic mystery was one thing, but if there was more than intellectual rivalry at play, things were about to become far more complicated. "Mademoiselle, I will take it from here. You should rest," Poirot said gently. "We will speak again later. I must get a closer look at the professor's room." The woman nodded, though she looked far from reassured. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. Poirot watched her go before turning back to the manager. "I will need access to the professor's room," Poirot said firmly, "and I must speak with the other guests immediately. There are answers here, monsieur, hidden in plain sight." The manager swallowed hard, no doubt sensing that Poirot was closing in on the truth. "Of course, monsieur," he replied. Right away, Poirot's mind was already piecing together the first thread of the puzzle. As he made his way toward the professor's room, he knew this would not be a simple case. Too many people with hidden motives, too many unanswered questions, and the sands of the desert, ever shifting, were keeping their secrets close. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. Poirot stepped into the professor's room with quiet deliberation. The door, though it had been opened earlier during the search, still creaked slightly as he pushed it open. The dim light from the setting sun filtered through the thin curtains, casting long shadows across the room. It was a well-kept, scholarly space, with bookshelves lining the walls, an antique writing desk by the window, and a series of maps of the desert laid out on a large table. Yet, despite its orderliness, Poirot could sense an undercurrent of disorder in the air, a sign that something had been disturbed, though not in an obvious way. The bed was neatly made, with only the faintest indentation of where the professor's form had been. A coat, neatly folded, sat on the chair by the desk. It was also carefully arranged, so meticulous, almost too much so. Poirot ran his fingers over the desk, noting the absence of dust in places where it should have been. One of the drawers was slightly ajar, just enough to suggest it had been rifled through. He opened the drawer fully, taking note of its contents: a few notebooks, a pen, and a few carefully folded papers. Most intriguing was a small wooden box tucked behind the papers. Poirot picked it up gently, as though handling a fragile artifact. When he opened it, he found a simple but elegant ring inside, engraved with intricate symbols, none of which he immediately recognized. The professor's interest in the ancient desert was more than mere academic curiosity. Poirot surmised it was clear the man had uncovered something that was worth more than mere academic fame. His obsession with the dunes was no casual interest. There were secrets here, secrets that only a few could understand. The ring was the first piece of solid evidence Poirot had uncovered. It felt important, but how? The answer was elusive, yet Poirot knew it held significance. As he replaced the box in the drawer, Poirot turned his attention back to the room, his sharp eyes noting every detail. On the surface, everything appeared ordinary, but beneath that veneer, there was something amiss. He could feel it, like a tiny crack in a painting that threatened to reveal something far more complex. Beneath the surface, his thoughts were interrupted by the soft tap of footsteps approaching. Poirot stood and turned as the hotel manager entered the room, followed by several of the other guests, all of whom had gathered as instructed. They were the ones who would reveal the next steps in this complex puzzle. "Monsieur Poirot," the manager greeted him with a strained smile. "These are the guests who were closest to Professor Marlowe. I've gathered them here, as you requested." Poirot nodded, his eyes scanning the group. There were 6 of them: a stout man in his 50s, clearly a businessman; a tall, elegant woman in her 30s, with sharp features and an air of sophistication; a young man, barely 20, dressed in the latest fashion, his face set in a permanent smirk; an older woman with a deep frown, dressed in black, looking as though she'd rather be anywhere else; a professor from a nearby university, likely a colleague of Marlowe's; and a quiet, unassuming man who barely seemed to draw attention to himself. Poirot's gaze flicked over each of them, his trained eye noting their nervous fidgeting, their subtle body language. One was too calm, another too agitated. A few were avoiding eye contact, while others glanced at each other in silence. In a room full of suspects, it was clear that each had something to hide. "Thank you, monsieur," Poirot said to the manager before turning his attention to the group. "Please have a seat, all of you. There is much to discuss." His words, calm yet firm, echoed in the stillness of the room. The guests hesitated for a moment before sitting, their eyes fixed on Poirot, who remained standing, as if to assert his authority over the situation. He studied each one of them intently, noting the shifts in posture, the subtle shifts of weight from one leg to the other. Each one was trying, in their own way, to control how much they revealed. Poirot addressed the group without preamble. "I am sure you all know why you are here. Professor Marlowe has disappeared, vanished, it seems, without a trace. But I assure you, my friends, there is no such thing as an empty room. All is revealed in time, and the truth is hidden in the smallest of details." He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "Each of you knew Professor Marlowe in one way or another. What I seek is not only your statements, but also your behavior. What you do not say is just as important as what you do. There are secrets in this room, secrets that you will reveal, knowingly or unknowingly. Through your actions." The businessman, a middle-aged man with a ruddy complexion, cleared his throat. "I assure you, Poirot, I knew nothing of Marlowe's disappearance. I had no reason to be involved. I am simply a guest here, as you know." Poirot's eyes locked on the man's. "Ah, monsieur, but you are not merely a guest, are you? You are here on business, in the midst of a group of intellectuals. But your interest in the professor's work, was it purely professional?" The businessman's eyes widened for a brief moment, and Poirot could see the flicker of guilt before the mask returned. He knew the answer would come, eventually. The businessman was hiding something, but Poirot was content to wait for it to unfold. The woman in her 30s, who had remained eerily silent up to this point, finally spoke. "Professor Marlowe was fascinating," she said coolly, "but I hardly think that his disappearance has anything to do with me. I barely knew him. We exchanged pleasantries at dinner once or twice, but that was all." Poirot watched her closely, taking in the slight tremor in her voice, the tension in her shoulders. There was more to this woman than met the eye, and Poirot had a feeling that the professor's disappearance might be tied to her in some way. The others offered their own statements, each one more or less claiming ignorance. Yet Poirot could feel the web of deception tightening, each response a thread in a pattern that was slowly beginning to reveal itself. "Very well," Poirot said, his voice calm but sharp, like the strike of a blade. "I will speak with each of you individually, in time. But be warned, no one is beyond suspicion. The truth is rarely what it seems." As the guests filed out, each with their own expression, some worried, some dismissive, Poirot remained, his eyes fixed on the empty space where the professor's belongings had once been. He had only just begun to unravel the mystery, but he knew the journey ahead would be treacherous. One thing was clear: this was no ordinary disappearance. This was the beginning of something much more complex, and Poirot had a long road ahead before he would reveal the truth beneath the shifting sands. Chapter 4. Poirot arrived next morning at dawn, bright and clear, casting a wash of pale sunlight across the desert. The wind had quieted overnight, leaving the shifting dunes in a serene, almost otherworldly stillness. The hotel was quiet too, the tension of the previous day still hanging in the air like an unspoken threat. Guests moved through the lobby, their faces tight with uncertainty, casting furtive glances at one another. The disappearance of Professor Marlowe had cast a shadow over the oasis, and the growing unease could be felt in every corner. Hercule Poirot was not one to let time pass without purpose. He awoke early, his mind already racing through the details of the case. The previous evening's interviews had given him little to go on, but they had revealed important insights into the personalities of the suspects. Insights he would soon begin to exploit. He was convinced that there was far more to the professor's disappearance than a simple accident. The clues were too carefully hidden, the behavior of the guests too suspicious for it to be anything but deliberate. Poirot dressed with his usual meticulousness, his movements precise and deliberate. He examined himself in the mirror, adjusting the angle of his mustache and the fit of his suit. There was no room for imperfection in his appearance, as there was none in his thinking. As Poirot descended the stairs to the hotel's dining room, he could sense that the tension in the air had not lifted. The guests were still whispering among themselves, eyes darting nervously. The manager, who had been absent the night before, now stood at the entrance, his posture rigid. As if bracing for something to unfold, Poirot approached him, his step slow and measured. The manager looked up, his expression stiff with concern. "Monsieur Poirot," he greeted him with a forced smile. "I trust you slept well?" Poirot gave him a polite nod. "I slept as well as one can in a place of such disturbance." "Have you gathered the guests as I requested?" The manager hesitated, his hands clasped behind his back. "Yes, they are waiting for you in the drawing room." "I must admit, I am beginning to feel the weight of this situation, monsieur. The disappearance. It is unsettling." Poirot allowed a slight smile to play at the edges of his lips, though his eyes remained serious. "It is indeed unsettling, but I assure you, monsieur, that we will find the truth. One must simply know where to look." The manager, visibly relieved at Poirot's calm demeanor, stepped aside to allow him to enter the drawing room. The guests were already gathered there, sitting in a semicircle, their faces an array of expressions, some apprehensive, some irritated, others simply exhausted. The young woman, Mademoiselle Marlowe, was seated near the front, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. She looked up at Poirot, her expression a mix of hope and desperation. Poirot nodded at her before turning to the others. "Good morning, mesdames et messieurs. I trust you all had a restful night?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost conversational. No one responded, and Poirot took his seat at the head of the room, positioning himself so that he could see every guest clearly. He studied each of them in turn, taking note of their posture, the way they shifted in their seats, the subtle signs of discomfort. "We are here because of a simple fact," Poirot began, his tone serious. "Professor Marlowe has disappeared. A man cannot vanish without a trace, not in this day and age. And I assure you, I shall leave no stone unturned until the truth is uncovered." The room remained silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over the guests like a heavy fog. Each of them knew that the detective would not rest until he had answers, and none of them could afford to ignore the scrutiny that would inevitably follow. Poirot's eyes scanned the room, lingering for a moment on each guest. He could feel the tension among them, the way they tried to avoid meeting his gaze, as if each was hiding something. The young man in the corner, with his flashy clothes and confident air, was the first to break the silence. "You can't be serious, Poirot," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Do you really think any of us are involved in this? It's just a case of someone getting lost in the dunes, nothing more." Poirot regarded him with cool amusement, his gaze unwavering. "Ah, monsieur, you are quick to dismiss the situation. But that, in itself, is telling. Why are you so eager to convince everyone that there is nothing to investigate? What is it that you fear?" The young man, taken aback by Poirot's directness, opened his mouth to retort but faltered. He quickly closed it again, glancing uneasily round the room. Poirot's gaze then shifted to the woman in her 30s, the elegant one who had spoken so little the previous evening. She met his gaze without hesitation, her eyes steady, though there was a hint of something sharp behind her composure. "And you, madam," Poirot continued, his voice like a velvet knife, "you seem to be quite at ease in this situation. You are not worried about the professor's disappearance. Why is that?" Her lips tightened, and for a moment, Poirot could see the faintest flicker of irritation in her eyes. "I have nothing to do with it, Monsieur Poirot," she replied, her voice calm and collected. "But I do find your methods unconventional. I don't think this is a situation that requires such attention. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Oh, madam, attention is exactly what is needed, for without it, one might never see the truth hidden beneath all the distractions. The questions that need to be asked are not always the obvious ones. He sat back, allowing his words to settle into the room. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond. Poirot knew that none of them had expected to be under such scrutiny, but that was precisely why they were here. They would all have to answer his questions one by one and reveal the secrets they had kept so carefully hidden. I shall begin with a few questions, Poirot said, his voice firm and unyielding, and I ask that you answer truthfully. The game, mesdames et messieurs, has only just begun. As Poirot began his questions, he could feel the shifting sands of the mystery beginning to form around him, each answer another step closer to the truth. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. Guests, though seated in front of Hercule Poirot, were hardly at ease. Their discomfort was palpable, each one shifting in their seat, stealing furtive glances at one another, and avoiding direct eye contact with the detective. It was clear that none of them relished the idea of speaking about the disappearance of Professor Marlowe. Yet, Poirot's quiet assurance filled the room like an undeniable weight. Now, mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice calm but carrying a quiet command. I shall start with the first question. Each of you will answer me truthfully, of course. The truth has a curious way of surfacing, especially when one least expects it. Poirot's eyes swept across the room, his gaze lingering just long enough on each person to unsettle them. Mademoiselle Marlowe, he said, finally focusing on the young woman seated nearest him. Her eyes were red from sleep, but there was a determination about her, something in her posture that made her seem more composed than she had the previous night. You told me yesterday that your father had been talking about a discovery he had made in the dunes, Poirot continued. Can you tell me more about that? Mademoiselle Marlowe hesitated for a moment, glancing at the other guests as if unsure whether to share more. He was excited, she said softly, but also a little apprehensive. He spoke of something he found, a set of markings in the sand, an unusual pattern, but he didn't tell me exactly what they were. He was always so secretive when it came to his research. I think he wanted to keep it to himself until he had all the answers. Poirot nodded, as if pondering her words. And when did your father last mention these markings? It was yesterday, just before he disappeared. He seemed anxious, if you ask me. He told me he was going to the dunes to investigate further. That was the last I saw of him. Did he say anything else? Poirot's eyes were now fixed on her face, studying her reaction. She shook her head, the emotion in her voice evident as she spoke. No, I wish he had. I don't know why he went alone. I should have gone with him. Poirot considered her words carefully. She spoke with conviction, but Poirot knew that even the most honest person could have a subconscious tendency to withhold certain details. Thank you, mademoiselle, he said, then turned his attention to the other guests. Let us continue with the others. The tall, elegant woman who had spoken so little before caught Poirot's eye next. Her name was Lady Veronica Hawke, and she had carried herself with an aloof air, much like a woman accustomed to being the center of attention. Yet now, her eyes seemed narrowed with suspicion as Poirot turned to her. Lady Hawke, Poirot said, I must ask you about your connection with Professor Marlowe. How well did you know him? Lady Hawke straightened in her chair, her eyes fixed firmly on Poirot. I knew him well enough, she replied, her voice measured but tinged with an underlying irritation. We were both guests at a symposium on desert archaeology months ago. He spoke of his research, but he was always so wrapped up in his own theories. I never paid much attention. Poirot's eyes lingered on her face, the slightest crease forming between his brows. Did you speak to him at all during this trip? She paused, then nodded. Yes, a few times, but it was brief, mainly about the usual topics. Nothing of great consequence. Why do you ask? Poirot did not respond immediately, allowing the silence to stretch. He was letting her words settle, watching her carefully. There was a sense of unease about her, a tension that hadn't been there the night before. She was too controlled, too polished. Lady Hawke, might I suggest that you were not entirely uninterested in the professor's research? Poirot's voice was gentle, but there was a subtle challenge in his tone. Could it be that you had some professional curiosity about what he was so eager to discover in the dunes? Her gaze flickered, just for a moment, before she regained her composure. Curiosity, yes, but not for personal gain, Poirot. I am not interested in digging up ancient relics or hidden secrets. I have enough of my own work to attend to. Poirot studied her closely. Her defense was predictable, yet there was something in her demeanor that told him she was not being entirely truthful. She wasn't lying, no. She had learned the art of concealment much more subtly than that. He would need to keep an eye on her. Thank you, Lady Hawke, Poirot said, nodding slightly. He then turned his attention to the young man, who had been silent up until now. His name was Thomas Cartwright, a man in his early 20s with the brash confidence of someone who had not yet learned the value of humility. Mr. Cartwright, Poirot began, his voice smooth as he regarded the young man. You have been quite quiet throughout this discussion. I must ask, what was your relationship with the professor? Cartwright seemed almost offended by the question, his jaw tightening as he spoke. I hardly knew the man, he said curtly. He was just another academic to me. I have no interest in his dessert nonsense. I prefer more practical matters. Poirot's gaze sharpened. The young man was quick to dismiss Marlowe, but his body language spoke differently. The slight tension in his shoulders, the clenched fists, the nervous twitch of his fingers, it was all too obvious to Poirot. I see, Poirot said, leaning forward slightly. And yet, you were aware of his research, yes? Did you know about his recent findings in the dunes? Cartwright shifted in his seat, his gaze flickering toward the window. Look, I told you, I didn't know him. I have better things to do than discuss what he thought he found in the sand. Poirot watched him for a moment longer, then nodded. Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. I will speak with you again if I require further clarification. The interview continued as Poirot methodically worked through the remaining guests. With each question, he was uncovering more than just their answers. He was peeling back layers of behavior, watching for inconsistencies. The guests were beginning to grow more uneasy, shifting in their seats, avoiding his eyes. Poirot knew he was getting closer, but there was still much to uncover. As the last interview concluded, Poirot took a step back, absorbing the various responses. Each person had their own story, but one thing was certain: the professor's disappearance was no accident. The more Poirot listened, the clearer it became. Someone in this room was hiding the truth, and Hercule Poirot would stop at nothing to uncover it. Chapter 6. The first false lead. Poirot sat in his chair, the weight of the previous interviews still pressing upon him. The hotel room was now empty, save for the faint sounds of wind sweeping across the desert outside. The guests' answers had been varied, each one adding a layer of complexity to the growing mystery. But in his mind, a single thread of doubt lingered, one that refused to reveal its full truth. He leaned back, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the armrest of his chair as he mentally pieced together the fragments. The door creaked open, and the hotel manager stepped in, his face as tense as it had been earlier. Monsieur Poirot, he began, his voice barely above a whisper, there has been a development. Poirot's attention immediately sharpened. A development? What is it, monsieur? The manager hesitated, clearly unsettled. There's a man, one of the guests, who has been found. He was caught in the dunes, not far from the spot where Professor Marlowe was last seen. He says he was. Following the professor, Poirot raised an eyebrow. Following him? Was this man with the professor before his disappearance? The manager shifted uncomfortably. That is what he claims. He says he lost track of the professor when he ventured deeper into the dunes. But we found him alone. The professor was nowhere in sight. Poirot's mind immediately sprang into action. This could be the lead he had been waiting for. The stranger in the dunes. Claiming to have been following the professor, it was the perfect setup for a false lead. Where is this man now? Outside, the manager replied. He's being detained by the authorities. He seems disoriented. His story does not make complete sense. Poirot rose to his feet, his sharp eyes narrowing with interest. I shall speak with him, he declared. Show me the way. The manager led Poirot down the long, dimly lit corridor, the air heavy with anticipation. As they reached the small courtyard at the back of the hotel, Poirot could see a small group of uniformed men standing around a disheveled figure, a man in his late 30s, his clothes dusty from the dessert, his face drawn and pale. He seemed out of place, almost as if he didn't belong in the luxury of the hotel at all. The man's eyes were darting nervously, but when he saw Poirot, something in his demeanor shifted. He straightened slightly, as if trying to regain control of himself. Monsieur, Poirot said, his voice calm yet firm, I understand you have been following Professor Marlowe. Tell me, what exactly happened in the dunes? The man swallowed hard, his lips trembling slightly as he spoke. I was trying to find him, he stammered. I was supposed to meet him. He had asked for my help, but I lost track of him. I called out for him, but there was no answer. It was like the wind swallowed his voice. And then I couldn't find him anywhere. Poirot took a step closer, his eyes scanning the man carefully. There was an air of desperation about him, but also something else, something that suggested he was withholding part of the truth. You were supposed to meet him, Poirot repeated. But why? Why would a man like Professor Marlowe ask for your help? The man shifted uncomfortably under Poirot's gaze. I'm a colleague of his, an archaeologist. We were working together, trying to uncover something in the dunes. But it's difficult to explain. Poirot's eyes never left him. Something in the dunes, he repeated. What exactly was it that you were searching for? And why would the professor trust you? The man hesitated again, his eyes darting to the ground. It's not what it seems, he muttered, his voice barely audible. The professor found something important, and he didn't want anyone to know. I was just trying to help him. The man's voice trailed off, and Poirot's mind began to work at a furious pace. The words "something important" echoed in his mind. The professor had indeed found something, but what? And why would the man not want anyone to know? Poirot took a step back, his gaze still fixed on the man. You say the professor didn't want anyone to know. Did he tell you what it was that he had discovered? Was it related to his research? The man seemed to shrink under Poirot's scrutiny. No, he didn't say. But I think it was something big, something worth hiding. I don't know. I never should have gone after him. It was a mistake. Poirot's mind raced as he processed the man's words. The mystery was beginning to take shape, but it was still shrouded in fog. One thing was certain, though, the professor had uncovered something, and that something was at the heart of his disappearance. Poirot's gaze shifted to the group of authorities standing nearby. This man is free to go, but I will be speaking with him again, Poirot said, his tone commanding. He may not be the one who has hidden the truth, but he knows more than he is willing to admit. The authorities nodded, though they appeared uncertain about releasing the man. Poirot turned back to the stranger. I suggest you tell me everything you know. If you do not, the consequences will not be kind. As Poirot walked away from the scene, his mind was filled with possibilities. The man had been in the dunes, following the professor, but had lost him without a trace. Was it an accident, or had something more sinister occurred? And what was the professor hiding in the desert sands? Poirot was certain that the key to solving the puzzle lay in the shifting dunes, and he would leave no stone unturned. The game was growing more complex, and the first false lead had only deepened the mystery. One thing was clear: the professor's disappearance was no random event, and Poirot would not rest until the truth was uncovered. Chapter 7. The psychological gamut. Morning sun beat down on the desert Oasis Hotel, casting long shadows over the courtyard where Poirot stood, reflecting on the developments of the previous day. The mysterious man from the dunes, now in custody, had only added more questions than answers. It seemed as though the puzzle pieces were scattered, yet not a single one fit together just yet. Poirot had spent the night in deep thought, reviewing the contradictions in the suspect's statements and wondering what, if anything, the missing professor had uncovered in the vastness of the desert. There was a pattern emerging, but it was still blurry, like a half-formed figure in the sand. It needed more pressing, more uncovering. Poirot strode into the hotel's main hall, his sharp gaze skimming the guests gathered for breakfast. The usual chatter filled the room, but there was an underlying tension that lingered in the air, felt by all, though not openly discussed. The disappearance of Professor Marlowe had left its mark on every guest, but none would admit it. Poirot knew that this was his moment, the perfect time to manipulate the room, to probe deeper into the minds of those who harbored secrets. Mademoiselle Marlowe, Poirot greeted as he approached the young woman, who sat near the large windows, staring out at the distant dunes. She looked up, her face still pale from the previous day's events. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, one that Poirot had noticed, but hadn't yet fully addressed. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," she replied, her voice still tinged with unease. "Have you learned anything new?" Poirot sat across from her, the chair creaking softly under his weight. "You should not ask such a question if you are not prepared for the answer, mademoiselle," he replied, a slight smile playing at the corners of his lips. "But I believe the answers are closer than you think. What matters now is how you choose to react to them." The young woman blinked, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean? You have found something?" Poirot hesitated for a moment before speaking again, his voice low but firm. "There are things at play here, mademoiselle, that go beyond your father's disappearance. It is not merely the sands of the desert that hide the truth, but also the minds of those around you." She looked at him with curiosity, but also an edge of frustration. "What are you saying, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's gaze drifted toward the other guests, who were too caught up in their own conversations to notice his scrutiny. "There are lies in this room, mademoiselle," he said. "Subtle lies, well-crafted, like threads woven into a fine tapestry. But they are there, and they are beginning to unravel." Mademoiselle Marlowe leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Lies about what?" Poirot's tone was steady, measured. "About your father, about what he uncovered, about the true nature of the discovery, and about who might want to keep it hidden." She stared at him for a moment, her lips pressed together as if processing his words. "You think someone in this room is involved?" she asked quietly. "I am not yet sure, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. "But I do know that this is no mere accident. This is a carefully constructed game, a game of manipulation, misdirection, and secrets." Just as Poirot was about to continue, the hotel manager approached them, his face drawn. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice strained, "there's a situation. One of the guests has requested to speak with you." Poirot glanced up at him. "Who is it?" "The man from the dunes, monsieur," the manager replied. "He insists that he has something important to tell you. He says it's about the professor's disappearance." Poirot stood up immediately, his interest piqued. "Lead the way." The man from the dunes was seated in a small room near the back of the hotel, his hands trembling slightly as he awaited Poirot's arrival. The detective's sharp eyes assessed the man as he entered the room. He was still disheveled, his clothes no more than a patchwork of dust and sweat from his time in the desert. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," the man said with an air of desperation. "I need to tell you everything. I was following the professor, yes, but there's more to it. Much more. I was part of something he discovered. And now, I fear, it may cost me my life." Poirot remained standing, his expression unreadable. "What are you saying, monsieur? Tell me what you know." The man's voice dropped to a whisper. "The professor didn't just find markings in the sand, Poirot. He found something far more dangerous. Something hidden beneath the dunes for centuries. He was working with others, people I didn't know about. They didn't want the truth to be exposed, and they were willing to do anything to keep it buried." Poirot leaned in slightly, his gaze unwavering. "And you, monsieur, what role did you play in this?" The man shook his head, his face clouded with fear. "I didn't know, not at first. I was just helping him with his research. But then I saw what he was uncovering, and I realized I had to get out. I was supposed to meet him, to help him with something critical. But when I got to the dunes, he was gone. And the others, they were there too." Poirot's brow furrowed, his mind racing. "The others," he repeated. The man nodded. "Yes, they were waiting for him to return. They didn't want me to know what they were really after. But I overheard something about an artifact, something ancient, something powerful. And that's why he's gone. They took him, Poirot." Poirot's mind was ablaze with new possibilities. The man's words, though fragmented, painted a picture of a hidden conspiracy, a group willing to go to extreme lengths to protect their secrets. And now, the professor has paid the price for it. The professor's discovery, Poirot murmured to himself, was more than just a simple academic interest. It was something dangerous. The man nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "Please, Poirot, you have to stop them. I don't know who they are, but I know they will stop at nothing." Poirot stood silently for a moment, his thoughts racing. This was the turning point. This was where the true nature of the mystery began to emerge. He had already known that something hidden in the desert was at the heart of this case. But now, he was learning that it wasn't just a matter of academic rivalry or a simple disappearance. This was something far darker, far more dangerous. "Do not worry, monsieur," Poirot said finally, his voice calm and steady. "I will uncover the truth, and I will find out who is behind this." The psychological game had begun, and Poirot was ready to face whatever twists and turns lay ahead. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery. Poirot sat alone in his room later that afternoon, turning over the information the man from the dunes had shared with him. His mind worked at a furious pace, drawing connections, filling in the gaps, and yet, the picture remained incomplete. There were still pieces of the puzzle missing, and the complexity of the professor's disappearance seemed to grow by the hour. The mention of the artifact, the shadowy group that wanted to keep the truth hidden, it was all part of a larger game. But what game? And who were the players? As Poirot sat there, contemplating his next steps, a sudden knock on the door broke his thoughts. The hotel manager appeared, his face drawn and troubled. "Monsieur Poirot," the manager said, his voice tight. "There's been another incident." Poirot raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "Another incident? What is it?" The manager hesitated, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "It's a theft, monsieur, a letter. It's gone missing, and it seems to be connected to Professor Marlowe." Poirot stood up immediately. "A letter? Where was it taken from?" "The professor's room, monsieur. It was found missing just after the man from the dunes was brought in," the manager explained. "It was addressed to someone named JV. The authorities are already investigating, but they found nothing else. Just the letter, gone without a trace." Poirot's mind began to race. A missing letter, connected to the professor. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Show me," he said firmly. The manager led Poirot through the hotel's labyrinthine halls to the professor's room. Inside, Poirot's eyes immediately sought out the area where the letter had likely been kept. The room had been thoroughly searched by the authorities, but Poirot knew that the truth often hid in the places others overlooked. The professor's desk was still neatly arranged, as Poirot had seen it the previous day. Papers, books, and maps were scattered about, but nothing appeared out of place. Poirot moved to the desk, his hands hovering over the items as he scrutinized each one carefully. His gaze fell on a stack of papers near the corner of the desk. They were all neatly arranged, save for a single sheet, slightly askew. He picked it up, his eyes immediately catching the faint impression of ink where a letter had once rested. Poirot's fingers traced the edge of the paper, feeling the subtle indentation. The missing letter had been here, but now it was gone. And yet, there was a deeper mystery in the absence of the letter. Why would someone go to such lengths to take it? Poirot looked up at the manager, his mind already piecing together new possibilities. Do you have any idea what the letter contained? Was it important? The manager swallowed, clearly uncomfortable. We don't know, monsieur. The authorities are still trying to track it down, but we fear it may be critical to understanding what happened to the professor. Poirot nodded slowly, his thoughts swirling. The theft of the letter was no coincidence. Someone had removed it deliberately, and they had done so knowing that it would lead to further questions. But what was in the letter? And who was JV? Before Poirot could further ponder the matter, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Mademoiselle Marlowe, standing at the doorway of the professor's room. Her face tense with worry. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I overheard something. I don't know if it's relevant, but I thought I should tell you. Poirot turned to her, his eyes sharp with interest. What did you overhear, mademoiselle? She stepped forward hesitantly. It's about my father's research. I heard a conversation yesterday between Lady Hawke and Mr. Cartwright. They were talking in private, just before my father disappeared. I didn't hear everything, but they mentioned something about a deal, something about the professor's findings. Poirot's curiosity deepened. A deal? What was it they were planning, and how did it tie into the professor's disappearance? Do you remember anything specific from their conversation? Poirot asked, his voice gentle but insistent. Mademoiselle Marlowe paused, searching her memory. There was talk of a partnership, something about sharing the findings with someone else. They didn't mention names, but it sounded serious, like it was something they couldn't afford to let others know about. Poirot nodded thoughtfully, the pieces of the puzzle shifting ever so slightly. A partnership, a secret agreement. It was beginning to make sense. The professor had found something valuable in the dunes, and it appeared that several people were involved in a scheme to control it. But what was the deal, and how far would these people go to keep their discovery hidden? Mademoiselle, Poirot said, turning back to the manager, I will need to speak with Lady Hawke and Mr. Cartwright again. It seems the missing letter is not the only secret hiding in plain sight. The manager nodded, clearly eager to resolve the situation. Of course, monsieur. I will arrange it immediately, as the manager left to make the necessary arrangements. Poirot turned to Mademoiselle Marlowe. Thank you for your information, mademoiselle. You have helped me more than you know. But be cautious. There are people here who will stop at nothing to keep the truth hidden. She nodded, her expression one of deep concern. I don't understand it, Monsieur Poirot. Why would they want to hurt my father? Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind was already far ahead, considering the possibilities. I believe, mademoiselle, that your father uncovered something far more valuable than we have yet realized, and there are those who will do anything to control it. With a final nod, Poirot turned toward the door, ready to confront Lady Hawke and Mr. Cartwright once more. The game was afoot, and the truth was slowly beginning to emerge layer by layer. Chapter 9. hidden connection. Poirot's next course of action was clear. The time had come to confront the two guests whose behavior had piqued his suspicions. Lady Veronica Hawke and Mr. Thomas Cartwright. Both had been involved in the whispered conversation Mademoiselle Marlowe had overheard, and Poirot was certain that they were not as innocent as they appeared. The secrets they harbored were not yet fully exposed, but they would be soon. The drawing room was quiet when Poirot entered. The guests had gathered, though the atmosphere was far from welcoming. Lady Hawke was seated on one side of the room, her poised composure only serving to hide the tension beneath her cool exterior. Cartwright, on the other hand, fidgeted nervously in his seat, his eyes darting around the room as though he were already trying to make his escape. Poirot moved to the center of the room, his eyes briefly flicking to the manager who stood just behind the door. The man nodded slightly, signaling that everything was in place. With a sharp inhale, Poirot addressed the room. "Mademoiselle Marlowe has shared some intriguing information with me," Poirot began, his voice smooth but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. "I understand that some of you have had private conversations about Professor Marlowe's research, and these conversations have raised more questions than answers." Lady Hawke's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, but she remained silent. Cartwright shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed with color. Poirot continued, unfazed. "I believe that Professor Marlowe's findings in the dunes are not as harmless as some of you would like to believe. In fact, I believe that they are the very thing that brought him to an untimely end. But more than that, there are people in this room who have a vested interest in keeping these findings hidden." Lady Hawke, who had been silent up until now, leaned forward slightly. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice a smooth, practiced tone, "you're accusing us without evidence. What exactly are you implying?" Poirot's gaze fixed on her, his expression cold. "I am implying, madam, that the professor's disappearance is not a random event. It is the result of a well-planned scheme, one that involves not just academic rivalry, but something much more dangerous." The room fell silent, and Poirot's eyes flickered to Cartwright. "Mr. Cartwright," Poirot said, his tone even, "you were in the dunes, yes? Following the professor. But I suspect you were not just a simple observer. You were involved in something much deeper." Cartwright's face flushed even more, his eyes avoiding Poirot's. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, his voice shaky. "I told you, I was just helping the professor with his research. Nothing more." Poirot's voice remained unwavering. "You may think that, Mr. Cartwright, but the truth is more complex. You were following the professor because you had a stake in what he had discovered. You didn't just stumble upon it, no, you were part of something far bigger." Lady Hawke's eyes widened for a moment before she regained her composure. "This is absurd," she said, her voice rising. "We've all been through a great deal. The professor's disappearance is tragic, but it's not some conspiracy. You're jumping to conclusions." Poirot's gaze never wavered as he studied her reaction. There was something in her tone, something in the way she tried to discredit him so quickly, that told him she was hiding something important. She had too much to lose, and the professor's research was the key to it. "I'm afraid, madam, that you are mistaken," Poirot replied. "The truth lies in the connections between you all. You, Mr. Cartwright, and even the professor himself. There's a hidden thread that ties all of you together." Lady Hawke's mask of calm slipped for a brief moment, and Poirot could see it, an imperceptible flicker of fear in her eyes. She was aware of the gravity of what he was implying, but she was not ready to reveal her part in it just yet. Poirot turned his attention to the man who had been so reluctant to speak. "Mr. Cartwright. Mr. Cartwright, what is it that you know? Who else is involved? What was this partnership your colleague spoke of?" Cartwright opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. His breath quickened, and he looked at Lady Hawke for reassurance, but she did not meet his gaze. Instead, she stared at the floor, clearly unwilling to back him up. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You see, Monsieur Cartwright, the more you hesitate, the more it becomes clear. You were not just following the professor out of curiosity. You were a part of the larger scheme to uncover something in the dunes, something that would change everything." Cartwright swallowed hard, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "I didn't want to be involved," he muttered, "but they threatened me. Lady Hawke, she was the one who got me involved. She said there was something valuable, something important. I didn't want to, but I couldn't back out." Lady Hawke's face turned pale, her composure faltering. "That's not true," she snapped. "You're lying." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "No, madam, he is telling the truth. You were the one who knew about the artifact, about its importance. You were the one who pushed him into this. And you were the one who wanted the professor to disappear." Lady Hawke stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is madness," she hissed, backing away from Poirot. "You have no evidence, no proof. You're making accusations based on nothing." Poirot remained seated, his expression calm but firm. "It is not I who am making the accusations, madam. It is the truth that accuses you, and it is the truth that will be uncovered." As the tension in the room grew, Poirot knew that the time had come to unravel the final layers of deception. The connection between Lady Hawke and Cartwright, the artifact in the dunes, and the professor's disappearance, it was all tied together, and Poirot would stop at nothing to expose it. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue. Tension in the room was palpable. Lady Hawke, flushed with anger, stood facing Poirot, while Cartwright, seated nearby, shrank back, his eyes darting nervously between the detective and the woman who had once been his ally. Poirot, however, remained composed, his sharp mind already piecing together the details of their behavior. "I must apologize, madam," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the tension. "But you are not being entirely truthful. The truth often lies in the smallest of actions, and you, Madam Hawke, have made one fatal mistake." Lady Hawke shot him a sharp glance, her lips tight. "What do you mean? You have no proof." Poirot smiled, though there was no humor in his expression. "Ah, but I do, madam. Not of the kind you expect. You see, while you were busy making your accusations, you neglected to consider one very important detail: the letter." The mention of the letter hung in the air like a storm cloud. Cartwright's eyes widened, and Lady Hawke stiffened, her hands visibly trembling. Poirot's gaze remained fixed on her, unwavering. "You see, madam," Poirot continued, his voice deliberate, "I have been paying very close attention to what you and Mr. Cartwright have said. Your reactions, your body language, your subtle shifts in tone. You were eager to discredit the man from the dunes, but you revealed something far more telling." Lady Hawke stepped back, her gaze flickering nervously toward Cartwright, who now seemed to look everywhere but at Poirot. It was clear to Poirot that both had been involved in something far more sinister than they were willing to admit. "Let us return to the matter of the letter," Poirot said, his voice growing more deliberate. "It was missing, yes. The authorities have already searched for it, but I know the letter's location. It was never lost. It was hidden right beneath your nose, madam." Lady Hawke blinked, clearly taken aback. "What are you talking about?" Poirot didn't answer immediately. He walked slowly toward the window, his back to the group. His mind worked at full speed, already piecing the puzzle together. There was something about the letter that was far more important than anyone had realized. "I have already visited the professor's room," Poirot said softly, "and there I found a subtle clue, an indentation on a piece of paper. Not just any paper, mind you. It was a page tucked at the very bottom of the professor's research notes. It had been hidden from plain sight." The guests shifted uneasily, their faces betraying their uncertainty. Poirot turned to face them, his eyes sharp. "The letter, mademoiselle, was never lost. It was simply taken. It was meant to be hidden, to prevent anyone from discovering what was inside. And who, I wonder, would have been most interested in keeping the contents of that letter from being exposed? Poirot's gaze locked onto Lady Hawke. "You, madam." Lady Hawke opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat. Cartwright, too, seemed frozen in place. Poirot could sense their growing panic, but knew better than to rush his victory. "You had access to the professor's room, didn't you, madam?" Poirot continued. "You knew the professor was keeping something important in his research, and when he refused to share it with you, when he became obsessed with the dunes and his discoveries, you acted. You took the letter." Lady Hawke's face paled. "I did not take anything," she replied, her voice shaking. "You are mistaken." Poirot shook his head, his expression unyielding. "No, madam. The truth is, you took the letter because you knew its contents were too valuable to allow anyone else to see. You knew that if the professor's findings became public, it would change everything." A long silence followed. Poirot stepped closer, his gaze never leaving her. "You were willing to go to any lengths to protect this secret. And now, madam, it seems your attempts to hide it have failed. The truth always finds a way to the surface." Lady Hawke remained silent, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Poirot could see the weight of his words pressing down on her, the facade of control beginning to crack. She had been hiding something, and now, with every passing second, she was losing ground. Poirot turned to Cartwright, whose face was flushed with guilt. "And you, monsieur, you've been an unwilling accomplice. But now that the truth is unraveling, I wonder if you'll finally speak up." Cartwright's eyes flickered with fear, but he remained silent. Poirot gave a short nod, as though he had already read the man's answer. "It is clear to me now," Poirot said, his voice calm but resolute. The professor's discovery was not just an academic breakthrough. It was something far more dangerous, something that many would kill to keep hidden. Lady Hawke's jaw tightened, and for the first time, Poirot saw a faint trace of fear in her eyes. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she whispered. Poirot smiled slightly. "Ah, madam, I believe I do." As Poirot turned to leave, his mind was already formulating the next step in his investigation. The letter, the secret it held, and the connections between Lady Hawke, Cartwright, and the professor were only the beginning. The real mystery, however, lay just beyond the horizon, hidden in the shifting sands of the desert, and Hercule Poirot would stop at nothing to uncover it. Chapter 11. Tension's Reclusive Hotel seemed to hold its breath as Poirot's investigation moved toward its inevitable conclusion. Tension had settled over the desert oasis hotel, palpable in every corner. The guests, unsure of their roles in the unfolding drama, were now all bound by one undeniable truth. Secrets were about to be uncovered, and the tension of knowing that they were all playing parts in a much larger scheme was starting to weigh heavily on them. Poirot had left Lady Hawke and Cartwright with nothing more than their unease, their guilt hanging in the air between them. Neither had confessed, but their reactions had spoken volumes. Poirot knew that his next steps were critical. He had to tread carefully. This mystery had grown more complex with every new revelation, and a misstep now could unravel everything. Hours later, as Poirot sat quietly in his room, reflecting on the developments, a quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. He rose swiftly, his mind already shifting to the possibilities that might await him. The door opened, and the hotel manager stood before him, his face strained with anxiety. "Monsieur Poirot," the manager began, his voice barely above a whisper. There's been an incident." Poirot's brow furrowed. "What incident?" The manager hesitated, as though searching for the right words. "One of the guests, Monsieur Cartwright. He's been found outside, by the dunes, near the edge of the property. He says he was attacked. He insists it was someone from the group, but no one saw anything." Poirot's expression hardened. Attacked? Is he injured? The manager nodded grimly. Yes, monsieur. He appears to have been struck in the head, but not severely. The authorities are questioning him now, but he's very disoriented. I thought you should know immediately. Poirot's mind raced. This development wasn't entirely unexpected, though it added another layer to the already tangled web of deception. Cartwright had been acting strangely since Poirot's confrontation, and now it seemed that someone had grown desperate enough to silence him or intimidate him. Poirot's gaze sharpened. I will speak with him at once, Poirot said, his voice low but determined. He knew that this attack, whether staged or real, was connected to something deeper. It was more than just the professor's research, it was a matter of survival. As Poirot followed the manager outside into the cool desert air, the stillness of the night pressed in on him. The courtyard was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the distant rustle of the wind and the muffled voices of the authorities gathered around Cartwright. When Poirot reached him, he found the young man seated on a low stone bench, his face pale and his hands trembling. Monsieur Poirot, Cartwright gasped as soon as he saw him, his voice strained with fear. You have to believe me. I didn't see anything. I was walking, and then someone hit me. I don't know who it was, but they came from behind. They were quick. Too quick. I didn't see them, I swear. Poirot knelt down in front of him, meeting his wide eyes with calm, unblinking intensity. Mr. Cartwright, calm yourself, he said softly. Tell me exactly what happened. Who would want to attack you? Cartwright's breath hitched. I don't know. It all happened so fast. 1 minute, I'm walking toward the dunes, trying to get some fresh air, and then it's all a blur. Someone just struck me. They didn't speak, didn't say anything, just hit me and ran off. Poirot studied him carefully, his sharp eyes taking in Cartwright's disheveled state, the scratch on his cheek, the way his hands fidgeted nervously. There was something more to this story than he was letting on. But what was it? And why had he been targeted? Tell me, Mr. Cartwright, Poirot asked, his tone still steady and calm. Did you see anyone around you before the attack? Did you speak with anyone? Was there anyone you might have angered recently? Cartwright seemed to search for something in his mind, his eyes darting to the ground as he struggled to recall. I don't know. I've had no contact with anyone outside the usual group. There's no one I've angered. I've barely spoken to anyone in days, except Lady Hawke. He stopped suddenly, his eyes widening. Lady Hawke, he whispered, almost to himself. Poirot's attention sharpened instantly. What about Lady Hawke? Cartwright hesitated, his eyes flickering nervously. She's been acting strange lately. I've noticed it. She's been looking at me differently, almost like she's worried about something. But I didn't think anything of it until now. Poirot remained silent for a moment, considering Cartwright's words. His mind was working quickly, drawing connections. The relationship between Cartwright and Lady Hawke had been strained, that much was clear. But what had happened between them? Was Cartwright speaking out of fear, or was he beginning to unravel a deeper truth? Poirot turned to the authorities, who had been watching the exchange in silence. I would like to speak with Lady Hawke immediately, Poirot said, his voice calm but firm. And Mr. Cartwright, he added, his gaze piercing, I suggest you rest for now. You'll tell me more soon, but not before you have calmed your nerves. Cartwright nodded, his eyes still wide with fear, and Poirot turned back toward the hotel, his mind racing with new possibilities. Someone in this hotel was hiding something, and the attack on Cartwright was just the latest clue in a complex game. The truth was waiting, just beneath the surface. Chapter 12. The confrontation. The cool desert air pressed against Poirot as he made his way back to the hotel, his mind swirling with possibilities. The attack on Cartwright was no coincidence, it was a calculated move, a warning. Or perhaps an attempt to silence him. But why, and who was behind it? As Poirot entered the hotel, he immediately sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The guests were on edge, whispers spreading like ripples through the lobby. Each moment brought him closer to the truth, but with each step, the mystery seemed more elusive. Poirot moved quickly through the hallways, focused on his next confrontation. Lady Hawke. Her involvement had become clearer, pieced together from Cartwright's panicked words and her own nervous reactions. The fragments were starting to align, but Poirot knew he had to be patient. He couldn't rush this dot at Lady Hawke's suite. Poirot knocked lightly. A moment later, she appeared, her expression composed but tight, her eyes betraying a flicker of wariness when she saw him standing there. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice smooth but lacking her usual poise. "What is it that you wish to discuss now?" Poirot observed her for a moment, noticing how her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the sleeve of her robe. "Madam," he said calmly, "I have come to speak with you about the professor, about your connection with his research, and the events that have unfolded since his disappearance." Lady Hawke's expression shifted, a subtle tightening of her jaw. "I've already told you all I know, Monsieur Poirot," she replied, her tone edging toward defense. "I had no involvement in the professor's disappearance." Poirot stepped into the room without waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning the space, noting every detail. "It is not just the disappearance, madam. It is the letter and the attack on Mr. Cartwright. Both are connected, I believe, to the discovery your colleague made in the dunes." Lady Hawke froze, her eyes widening imperceptibly. For a brief moment, she looked almost vulnerable, her composure slipping just enough for Poirot to see the cracks. She quickly regained control, though, straightening up. "I don't know what you're implying, but I have nothing to hide." Poirot's gaze locked onto hers, unwavering. "Madam, I believe you are hiding more than you are willing to admit. Mr. Cartwright has been attacked, and you, madam, are the only one with both the motive and the means to silence him. He has spoken of your partnership, and now he is afraid. Afraid that you and your associates will stop at nothing to keep the truth buried." Lady Hawke's lips pressed together tightly, her face pale. "That is enough, Monsieur Poirot. You are accusing me of things I did not do." Poirot took a step closer, his voice soft but firm. "You are clever, madam, too clever, but I know how to unravel these webs you've spun. The truth is always there, just beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed." For a moment, Lady Hawke looked away, her gaze fixed on something far off, as if contemplating her next move. The silence stretched, and Poirot allowed the moment to linger, letting the weight of his words sink in. Finally, Lady Hawke broke the silence. "You are right about one thing, Poirot," she said, her voice quiet, almost resigned. "I have been hiding things, but it's not what you think." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Then tell me, madam, what is it that you've been hiding?" Lady Hawke took a deep breath and moved toward the window, staring out at the vast expanse of desert beyond. "My involvement in the professor's research goes far beyond academic curiosity," she began, her voice steady now, though laced with something darker. "You're right, there was something found in the dunes, something powerful. The professor and I had an agreement, but it wasn't about money or fame. It was about survival." Poirot's curiosity piqued, his sharp eyes watching her every movement. "Survival," he echoed. She turned to face him, her expression colder now. "The discovery the professor made in the dunes wasn't just a set of markings, Poirot. It was a key, an ancient key to something much more dangerous, something that could change the course of history. The people who wanted it, they would kill to keep it secret. And they've already started to." Poirot stepped back, his mind racing. The pieces were falling into place. The professor had found something ancient, something powerful, and it had put him in the crosshairs of forces, far beyond the reach of ordinary men. Lady Hawke's involvement, however unwilling or reluctant, made sense now. She had been trying to control the information, to keep the discovery from falling into the wrong hands. Who else is involved? Poirot asked, his voice low and insistent. Who are these people, madam? Lady Hawke shook her head. I don't know all of them, Poirot, but I know they are watching us. They know everything. I'm just trying to protect myself, protect my future. But now, it's too late. The professor's disappearance wasn't an accident. It was a warning. Poirot took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. A warning? A warning for whom? Lady Hawke's lips trembled slightly, but she said nothing. Poirot could see the fear in her eyes now, the fear that had been buried beneath her facade of composure. This was not the same woman he had met earlier. She was no longer in control, and Poirot knew that the time had come to expose the truth. Madam, the truth will come to light, Poirot said softly, but firmly. Whether you tell me or not. Lady Hawke's face twisted in frustration, but Poirot knew she had already said more than she intended. The game was far from over, but now, at last, the threads of the mystery were beginning to unravel. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. Heath evening had descended on the desert Oasis Hotel, bringing with it a silence that seemed to echo through the halls. The tension that had been building for days was now palpable, suffocating the guests in a quiet grip. Hercule Poirot had returned to his room after his conversation with Lady Hawke, his mind a whirlwind of new information. The truth was beginning to emerge, but it was still clouded in mystery. The professor's disappearance, the stolen letter, the threat that hung over everyone in the hotel. Everything was interconnected, yet none of the answers seemed to lead to a single culprit. Each thread Poirot tugged at only unraveled more secrets. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock on his door. He rose from his chair with a practiced grace, smoothing his suit as he approached. When he opened the door, the hotel manager stood before him, his face drawn with concern. Monsieur Poirot, the manager said urgently, there's trouble. One of the guests, Mr. Cartwright. He's gone, disappeared. Poirot's heart skipped a beat. Cartwright? After everything that had transpired, after the attack and the revelations from Lady Hawke, this was the last thing Poirot had expected. But then again, it wasn't surprising. Cartwright had been nervous, shaken by the events. If he had truly been a part of something larger, something dangerous, the fear of exposure could have driven him to act irrationally. Where is he now? Poirot asked, his voice calm but commanding. We believe he has fled into the dunes. The manager replied, his voice tight with fear. He's gone, Monsieur Poirot. We don't know how he managed to escape, but he's nowhere in the hotel. We've searched, and we've found nothing. Poirot's mind raced. Cartwright, the man who had been cornered and had seemed ready to confess, had vanished into the desert. It was the perfect escape. But why now? And what had Cartwright hoped to accomplish by fleeing? I will go after him, Poirot said, his tone firm. Prepare a team to search the area. We need to find him before it is too late. The manager hesitated for a moment before nodding, his face pale. At once, Monsieur Poirot. But please, be careful. There's something about this whole situation. Something not quite right. It's as if the sands are hiding more than just the professor. Poirot gave him a reassuring nod. I will be cautious, monsieur, but I must understand the full truth. As Poirot made his way outside, the cool night air hit him like a wall. The desert stretched endlessly before him, its vast emptiness swallowing the light from the hotel. The dunes, which had once seemed so beautiful, now appeared ominous and foreboding. Poirot's instincts told him that Cartwright had not fled out of fear alone. There was something more, something he had yet to uncover. Poirot moved swiftly, his boots crunching against the sand as the authorities and hotel staff followed behind. It didn't take long before they found evidence of Cartwright's path, footprints in the sand, Leading away from the hotel and toward the dark horizon, Poirot knelt down, studying the prints carefully. "These are fresh," he muttered to himself. "He has not been gone long." One of the authorities, a young officer, stepped forward hesitantly. "What do you think, monsieur? Is he alone?" Poirot stood up, brushing the sand from his knees. "It is hard to say," he replied, his gaze focused on the path ahead. "But Cartwright is not alone in this. He is part of a larger game, one that we have yet to fully understand." As they pressed on, the dunes seemed to shift before them, their sharp edges and dark corners forming a maze that could easily swallow a man whole. The wind had picked up, and the night grew colder as they ventured further from the hotel. Poirot's mind raced with questions, but he knew one thing for certain: Cartwright's flight was no accident. Something had triggered his desperation, and Poirot was determined to uncover what it was. After what felt like hours, the group reached the edge of the dunes. The footprints grew fainter, and Poirot's frustration grew with them. There was no sign of Cartwright. It was as if he had disappeared into the desert without a trace. Poirot stopped, his mind working furiously. There had to be a reason, a pattern to follow. He took a deep breath, and then, suddenly, he turned toward the others, searched the area carefully. Poirot ordered, "Look for anything out of place. A hidden trail, a broken branch, a piece of clothing, anything." The group spread out, their flashlights casting long shadows across the dunes. Poirot stayed close to the edge, his eyes scanning every inch of the dark landscape. And then, as if by chance, his eyes caught something, a slight shimmer in the sand, barely noticeable against the night sky. Poirot approached the spot carefully, his heart pounding with anticipation. He knelt down and brushed away the sand, revealing a small object buried beneath. His hand closed around it, and he pulled it free. That it was a simple silver ring, unadorned, except for an intricate engraving of symbols that looked ancient. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he studied the ring, the significance of it slowly dawning on him. This was no ordinary piece of jewelry. It was connected to the professor's discovery, and now it was in Cartwright's possession. "Interesting," Poirot muttered to himself, his mind working quickly. "Very interesting indeed." He stood up, the ring still in his hand. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but there was still much to uncover. Cartwright had not only fled, but he had left behind a clue, a key to unlocking the mystery that had remained hidden beneath the surface. "Monsieur Poirot," the manager's voice called from behind him, breaking his thoughts. "What have you found?" Poirot held up the ring, his eyes gleaming with new determination. "A clue, monsieur, a clue that will lead us to the truth, and to Cartwright." As the manager's eyes widened, Poirot turned back toward the dunes. The game was not over. In fact, it had only just begun. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The group made its way back to the hotel, the night air now colder than before. The silver ring in Poirot's hand felt like a weighted object that would soon reveal the missing pieces of the puzzle. But there was more to it than the ring itself. It was what it represented, a hidden truth, a final key to unlocking the professor's disappearance and the web of deceit that had spun around him. Poirot's mind raced as they returned to the hotel, his eyes fixed on the ring, now safely tucked into his pocket. He knew that Cartwright's flight, the professor's obsession with the dunes, and Lady Hawke's cryptic statements were all part of the same story. But it wasn't just a story about buried treasures or academic rivalry. It was a story of power, of people willing to do anything to control what had been discovered. As the hotel loomed ahead, Poirot's attention shifted. The manager was at his side, glancing at the detective with a look of both hope and fear. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice quiet but urgent, "what do you think of Cartwright's escape? Will he return?" Poirot remained silent for a moment, considering the manager's words. "Cartwright has fled, but he is not beyond our reach. He is like a man trapped in a web of his own making. He will return when the pressure becomes too much. It is only a matter of time." The manager nodded, though there was a look of uncertainty in his eyes. "And what about Lady Hawke?" Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. "Ah, madam, she is a woman of many masks, but we will peel them away, one by one." As they reached the hotel, Poirot turned to the manager. "I will need to speak with the guests again, individually. There are questions that have yet to be answered, and I must be certain of every detail." The manager nodded quickly. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I will arrange it." Poirot's first stop was Lady Hawke's room. She had been avoiding him since their last conversation, but the time for games was over. He knocked firmly on the door and waited for her to answer. A moment later, she appeared, her face carefully composed, though there was something in her eyes that betrayed her anxiety. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, stepping aside to allow him in. "I assume you are here to discuss the events of the night?" Poirot entered without a word, his eyes scanning the room. It was immaculate, as expected from someone like Lady Hawke. But Poirot knew that appearances could be deceiving. "I wish to speak with you about your involvement in the professor's research," Poirot said, his tone measured. "About what he found and why you are so determined to keep it hidden." Lady Hawke's face paled, but she quickly regained her composure. "I have told you everything I know, Monsieur Poirot. There's nothing more to discuss." Poirot's gaze fixed on her, his expression unwavering. "You are hiding something, madam. I can see it in your eyes. You know more than you've let on." Lady Hawke took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the edge of a nearby chair. "I told you," she said, her voice shaking ever so slightly. "The professor found something that no one was supposed to know about. And I did what I had to do to protect myself, to protect my future." Poirot took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "What did the professor find, madam? What is it that has made you so afraid?" Lady Hawke's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Poirot could see the fear in her eyes now, fear that was not just about being caught, but about something much larger. She was scared of the truth, of what it could mean for her, for everyone in the hotel. "The dessert holds secrets, madam," Poirot said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "But the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried, always comes to light." Lady Hawke's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time, Poirot saw the mask of composure slip. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She handed it to Poirot, her hands shaking. "This is all I have left," she whispered. "Please, just leave me out of it." Poirot unfolded the paper carefully, his eyes scanning the words written there. It was a map, a crude but detailed map of the dunes, with markings that indicated a location deep within the desert. But it was more than that. There, at the center of the map, was a symbol that matched the engraving on the ring Poirot had found earlier. "This," Poirot murmured. "This is the key." Lady Hawke stepped back, her eyes filled with desperation. "I didn't want any of this, Poirot. I never intended for anyone to get hurt. But I was trapped, just like Cartwright. And now it's too late. The others, they won't stop until they get what they want." Poirot's mind clicked into place. The others, the group that had been pulling the strings, the ones who would stop at nothing to gain control of the professor's discovery. It was clear now that they were not just after an artifact. They were after something far more dangerous, something that could change everything. "Who are they?" "Madam," Poirot asked sharply, "who are these people who will stop at nothing to protect their secrets?" Lady Hawke's eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape. I can't say any more. They'll kill me, Poirot. They'll kill all of us." Poirot stood still, the map still in his hand. "Then you leave me no choice, madam. You will tell me everything, or I will find the truth myself." Her face crumpled in fear, and for the first time, Lady Hawke's defenses cracked. She was no longer the calm, composed woman who had played her part so carefully. She was a terrified soul, trapped by her own actions. The truth was slipping into place, piece by piece, and now Poirot was closer than ever to uncovering the full extent of the conspiracy. Chapter 15. The Final Gatherings. Following day arrived with the oppressive heat of the dessert beginning to creep into the hotel. Once more, the guests, once enjoying the luxury and isolation of the oasis, now seemed weary, restless, and more than a little uneasy. Even the staff appeared more alert, casting wary glances at each other as they moved through the corridors. Hercule Poirot had been busy, piecing together the clues, gathering fragments of truth, and relentlessly pursuing every lead. He knew that the end was near. He could feel it in the air. But it wasn't just the professor's disappearance that weighed on him now. It was the truth hidden beneath the sand, a truth that had been buried long before anyone in the hotel had arrived. Poirot's steps were purposeful as he walked toward the gathering room, where the final confrontation would take place. He had sent word to all the guests, requesting their presence. His hand rested lightly on the doorknob before he turned it, and entered. The room was filled with the familiar faces, though each of them now looked a little different to Poirot. They had all been exposed in one way or another, their lies and secrets laid bare. But they still held something back, a final piece of the puzzle, perhaps? Or was it the fear of what would come once Poirot made the final revelation? Lady Hawke was there, her composure once again in place, though her eyes were not as steady as they had been before. Cartwright, too, was present, still looking worn and shaken from his flight into the dunes. His movements were stiff, and his eyes constantly darted around the room as though expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment. Mademoiselle Marlowe, her face still etched with grief, stood in the corner, her hands folded tightly in front of her. Poirot knew she had been through much, and yet, despite her emotional turmoil, she remained steadfast. Perhaps it was the love she held for her father, or perhaps it was her growing understanding of the dangers surrounding them all. The final two guests, those whose involvement Poirot had suspected from the start, were the professor's colleague, Dr. William Stroud, and a man whose presence had seemed almost forgettable until now, Mr. Charles Darrow. The former had been an ally of the professor's during his studies, though the details of their relationship had always seemed vague. The latter, however, was a man whose motivations had remained a mystery. He had kept his distance from everyone, never revealing much about his background. But now, in the midst of all the chaos, his actions were suddenly crucial. Poirot stood before them, his eyes scanning the group with meticulous precision. Every subtle shift of their posture, every glance exchanged between them, did not escape his notice. He could feel the weight of their combined secrets pressing against him, as if they were trying to hide one final thing from him. But Poirot was not one to be distracted by appearances. He had come too far to be misled now. "I trust you all are well," Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding, as he surveyed the group. "We are gathered here today to put an end to this mystery, to uncover the truth that has been hidden from us all. But before I continue, I must remind you of something important. Every action has consequences, every lie has its price, and every secret, no matter how carefully guarded, will eventually come to light." A murmur rippled through the room, and Poirot continued, "Yesterday, I spoke with Lady Hawke, and she revealed something that opened my eyes to the larger picture. The professor's research, his findings in the dunes, these were not simple academic discoveries. They were the key to something much more powerful. And the people involved in this are not ordinary men and women. They are part of a conspiracy, one that has gone to great lengths to protect its secrets." Lady Hawke's eyes flashed with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You are mistaken, Poirot," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "I did what I had to do. I was trying to protect the research. You don't understand what we were up against." Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving her. "Ah, but I do understand, madam. You were not protecting the research for the sake of knowledge. You were protecting it for the power it could bring. And when the professor refused to share it with you, when he wanted to keep it for himself, that's when things began to unravel. You acted out of fear, out of desperation." Lady Hawke's shoulders sagged, and for a moment, Poirot saw the mask of calm slip away entirely. The truth, it seemed, had finally caught up with her. Poirot then turned his attention to Cartwright, whose nervousness had only intensified since their last conversation. "Mr. Cartwright," Poirot said, his voice soft but firm, "I know you are afraid. But fear is not an excuse for ignorance. You knew something was wrong, and you were involved, whether willingly or not." Cartwright's face turned pale, and his hands trembled. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know the extent of it. I just wanted to help. I didn't know what I was getting into." Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone remained resolute. "The professor's disappearance was not an accident, Mr. Cartwright. It was a result of your actions. But there is one thing you did not realize: there is always a way to make things right. And the truth is not something you can run from." He turned to Dr. Stroud and Mr. Darrow, his eyes narrowing. "You two are more involved in this than you have admitted. You've known about the professor's findings, and you've kept silent. But silence is no longer an option." Dr. Stroud shifted uncomfortably. "I had nothing to do with his disappearance. He stammered. Darrow, however, said nothing. His gaze was steady, his expression unreadable. Poirot watched him carefully. There was something about the man's demeanor that intrigued him. His silence spoke volumes, but there was no denying the sense of guilt that seemed to hang around him like a dark cloud. Poirot's voice grew more intense. "You see, mesdames et messieurs, I have pieced together every clue. The ring, the stolen letter, the map to the dunes, it all leads to the same conclusion. There are people in this room who will stop at nothing to keep the truth hidden. But today, the truth will come to light." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle into the room. "And when it does, you will all see that the game is over." Chapter 16. The revealed tension in the room had reached a boiling point. Poirot's words had stirred something deep within the gathered guests, causing them to fidget and shift in their seats, each of them bracing for the inevitable unveiling of the truth. The professor's disappearance, the stolen letter, the attacks, and the whispered secrets, it had all led them here, to this moment, where Poirot was about to piece together the final details and expose the culprits. For a moment, the room fell silent. Even the distant hum of the desert wind seemed to fade into the background. As Poirot stood at the center of the gathering, he could feel the weight of their eyes on him, the palpable fear and anticipation that hung in the air. They were all waiting for him to pull back the curtain and reveal the hidden truth. Poirot took a deep breath, his eyes flicking from face to face, lingering on each person in turn. His mind worked like clockwork, processing every word, every movement, every nuance. He knew they were all hiding something, some more than others, but the truth was like a puzzle that had slowly come together, piece by piece. "Ah, mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice steady and firm. "It is time to conclude this little game. You have all played your parts, some of you more willingly than others, but now we will see the truth revealed in all its clarity." Lady Hawke, who had been standing near the window, stiffened at his words, her hand subconsciously reaching for the edge of the chair. "What are you implying, Poirot?" she demanded, her voice tight with barely concealed anger. Poirot gave her a calm smile. "I am not implying anything, madam. I am merely stating facts. Facts that you and everyone in this room have been trying to keep hidden." He turned his gaze toward Cartwright, whose unease had turned into visible distress. "Mr. Cartwright, you were the first to flee. You were the one who ran when the walls began to close in. Why? You were involved, yes, but you didn't know the full extent of what was happening, did you?" Cartwright swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously to the others. "I know, I didn't know everything. I didn't know who I was dealing with, but I couldn't let it go on. I thought I could stop it," he stammered, his voice breaking. "But I couldn't. It was bigger than me." Poirot nodded, his expression calm. "Yes, Mr. Cartwright, it was bigger than you, and you were caught in the web, as were the rest of us. But some of us played a more active role than others." He turned his attention to Dr. Stroud, who had been silent throughout the exchange. "Dr. Stroud," Poirot said, his tone colder, "you were the professor's colleague. But you were not just an academic companion, were you? You knew exactly what he had uncovered, and you, like Lady Hawke, wanted it for yourself." Dr. Stroud's lips pressed together in a tight line, but he did not speak. Poirot's gaze softened slightly. "You were a part of this, Dr. Stroud. You had your reasons, but they were no better than the others. You were involved in this conspiracy for the same reasons they all were: greed, power, and fear of exposure." Lady Hawke, who had been standing with her arms crossed tightly, finally spoke. "You're wrong, Poirot," she said, her voice filled with a quiet but fierce conviction. "The professor's research was not just valuable, it was dangerous. He found something that was never meant to be found. We had to keep it hidden, for all of our sakes. You don't understand what it was that he uncovered. You don't know the danger we were facing." Poirot regarded her calmly. "Ah, madam, but I do understand. I understand all too well. It wasn't just the professor's research that was valuable. It was his discovery of something much older, something much more dangerous. But that, too, is part of the truth, isn't it?" Lady Hawke's eyes widened, and Poirot could see the panic begin to creep into her expression. She had known all along that the game was nearly up. It was not just about the research, it was about what had been buried, what had been uncovered in the sands of the desert. "I know you tried to keep it hidden," Poirot continued, his gaze now focused on her, "but the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it is buried. The professor's discovery was not a mere academic breakthrough. It was a key to something much more powerful, something that would change everything." Lady Hawke's lips trembled, and for the first time, Poirot saw a crack in her composure. "You don't know what you're dealing with," she whispered. "You don't understand the implications of what he found. The consequences could be catastrophic." Poirot's expression softened, though his eyes remained sharp. "I understand more than you realize, madam. But the question remains, why did you choose to protect it, to keep it buried? Why did you silence the professor?" Lady Hawke closed her eyes, as if weighing the cost of revealing the truth. Then, finally, she spoke. "He didn't want anyone to know," she said, her voice strained. "The professor had found an ancient artifact, one with the power to change the world. But he was afraid of what would happen if the wrong people got their hands on it. I agreed to help him. But when it became clear that the others would stop at nothing to get it, I had no choice." Poirot listened intently, allowing her words to sink in. The professor's discovery wasn't just a treasure, it was something far more dangerous, something that could alter the balance of power. And now, Poirot understood why they had all been involved in the conspiracy: greed, fear, and a desperate desire to control what had been found in the desert. The letter, Poirot murmured, was a map to the artifact hidden in the dunes. That's why it had to be destroyed. Lady Hawke's face crumbled, the weight of Poirot's words hitting her like a tidal wave. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's why." Poirot's gaze hardened as he prepared for the final phase of his investigation. "Then it is time to go to the dunes," he said firmly. "The truth is out there, waiting to be uncovered, and no one will stop me from finding it." Chapter 17. Outcome. And just as the sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dunes as Poirot stood at the edge of the desert, his thoughts a whirlwind. The truth had been uncovered, piece by piece, but the final discovery was still ahead of him, hidden beneath the shifting sands. The artifacts, the letters, the lies, everything had led them here, to this desolate place, where the professor's secrets waited to be fully exposed. With the evidence he had gathered, Poirot had no doubt that the truth would finally be revealed. But the question remained, what would the consequences be? Could the hidden artifact really have the power to change the world? Or had the professor, in his obsessive search, uncovered something that should have remained buried? Behind him, the hotel had fallen silent. The guests, their suspicions now fully realized, were all gathered in the main room, awaiting the final word. Lady Hawke had been apprehended, her involvement made clear, and now the authorities had a clearer picture of the conspiracy. Cartwright, too, had been found in the dunes, though his fate was still uncertain. He had fled, terrified, but had been too weak to make a clean escape. Poirot knew that the final truth, the one that lay buried beneath the sands, would answer all the questions, and he was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. The night air grew colder as Poirot and the group made their way toward the professor's last known location. The desert stretched before them, an endless expanse of sand that seemed to go on forever. The map Lady Hawke had provided was their guide, and Poirot trusted it. There was something undeniably final about this journey, as if each step forward was an irreversible move toward the end of the mystery. "Monsieur Poirot," the hotel manager said, breaking the silence, "are you sure this is the right place?" Poirot turned, his eyes locking onto the manager's. "Yes, monsieur." The map was clear. This is where the professor's discovery lies, beneath the dunes, waiting to be found. The manager hesitated but said nothing more, the weight of Poirot's certainty settling heavily on him. The small team of authorities and staff followed closely behind, the flickering light of their torches illuminating the shifting landscape. As they reached the spot marked on the map, Poirot stopped, his gaze scanning the area carefully. There was nothing visibly out of place, just endless sand stretching out before them. But Poirot knew better. The answer lay beneath the surface, hidden from view. Poirot knelt down and began to sift through the sand with his hands. Slowly but steadily, he dug, his movements precise, methodical. The others stood back, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and impatience. But Poirot remained focused on the task at hand. There was no rushing this, no shortcuts, only the careful application of his little gray cells. It was several minutes before Poirot's hand struck something hard, a small metallic object. He paused, his breath steady as he cleared away more sand, revealing the object beneath. It was a small, ornate box, covered in intricate carvings. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he gently pried it open, revealing its contents. Inside the box was a stone of smooth, polished rock, no bigger than the palm of his hand. But it wasn't just any stone. The surface of the stone was covered in markings, symbols unlike anything Poirot had seen before, ancient, almost otherworldly in design. It was clear that the professor had been right. This was no ordinary discovery. This was something much more significant. "Is this it?" the manager asked, his voice tinged with awe. Poirot nodded, his expression unchanged. "This is the artifact the professor discovered. But it is not just a relic. It is the key, a key." The manager's voice faltered. "To what?" Poirot looked up, his eyes sharp. "To understand the past, and to control the future." The group stood in stunned silence as Poirot held the stone in his hand, the weight of its implications settling heavily in the air. They had all been part of something much larger than they had realized, a game of power, secrecy, and betrayal. The professor had uncovered a truth that, if revealed, could change everything. "I know what you're thinking," Poirot said, his voice calm yet resolute. "You want to understand what this artifact truly means. But the truth is, some things are better left buried. The professor knew that. And now we must decide what to do with it. Lady Hawke, who had been brought along at Poirot's insistence, stood in silence, her gaze fixed on the artifact. Her earlier defiance was gone, replaced by a strange, quiet resignation. "It was never meant to be found," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of regret. "The world is not ready for this." Poirot studied her for a moment before responding. "No one is ever truly ready for the truth, but that does not mean it should be hidden. The world must know what has been uncovered, even if it means facing the consequences." Cartwright, who had recovered somewhat from his earlier panic, stepped forward hesitantly. "But what if the truth destroys us? What if it's too much for anyone to handle?" Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "That is a question only time can answer. But for now, the truth must be shared. We cannot allow fear to keep it buried. We must face it, no matter the cost." The group was silent, each person lost in their own thoughts. The desert around them seemed to stretch on forever, a vast emptiness that echoed the weight of what had just been discovered. Poirot knew the journey was far from over, but the final piece had fallen into place, and with it, the truth had been uncovered. As the group turned to head back to the hotel, Poirot held the artifact carefully in his hand. He knew that their world was about to change whether they were ready for it or not. Chapter 18. The closing remark return to the hotel was a somber one. The desert winds had picked up, swirling the sand into a haze that obscured the path ahead. Poirot, his eyes fixed on the artifact that still lay carefully wrapped in his hand, knew that the journey was nearing its end. The answers had been uncovered, but the repercussions of what had been found still hung heavily in the air. Lady Hawke walked quietly beside him, her posture straight, but her expression marked by a deep sense of unease. It had been hours since Poirot had uncovered the artifact, and yet the weight of the discovery had not left them. Cartwright, too, had remained strangely silent, his earlier nervousness subdued but still present. The truth about the professor's research, the artifact, and the forces behind it had shaken them all to the core. As they reached the hotel, Poirot felt the tension that still gripped the group. Everyone had their own thoughts, their own fears, but there was one thing they all shared: the burden of knowing that something dangerous had been uncovered, something powerful enough to change the course of history. Inside the hotel, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The staff moved quietly, aware that the investigation had reached its peak, and the guests, those who remained, watched from a distance, their curiosity and unease evident. Poirot moved toward the drawing room, where the remaining guests had gathered. The final confrontation was set to take place. It was time to draw the curtains on this chapter of their lives and bring the story to its logical conclusion. As he entered the room, the eyes of the guests turned toward him, each one filled with a mixture of fear, guilt, and resignation. Poirot gestured for them to sit, his expression calm but resolute. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "You have all played your parts in this story. Each of you has contributed to the mystery that has unfolded before us, whether by intention or by circumstance." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the group, noting their reactions. "But now, the time has come to reveal the truth. The professor's disappearance was not just the result of a tragic accident. It was the result of a web of secrecy, of fear, and of power." Lady Hawke shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes fixed on the floor. Cartwright, still pale, glanced up but said nothing. The others, too, seemed to await Poirot's words with bated breath. "The artifact," Poirot continued, "was not just a discovery, it was a key to something far greater. The professor, in his quest for knowledge, uncovered something that was never meant to be found. And those who sought to keep it hidden, to control it, were willing to do whatever it took to silence anyone who threatened that control." He turned to Lady Hawke. "You, madam, were the key player in this. You saw the value in what the professor found, but you were not alone in your desire to possess it. There were others, people who have yet to be named, who would stop at nothing to ensure that the professor's research was kept from the world. Lady Hawke's eyes flickered, but she said nothing. Poirot's gaze was unwavering. You believed you were protecting the world from something dangerous, but in doing so, you became part of the very conspiracy you sought to prevent. And in the end, it was your fear, not your knowledge, that drove you to act. Poirot turned then to Cartwright, whose shoulders sagged under the weight of the detective's scrutiny. Mr. Cartwright, you were caught in the middle. You were not prepared for the gravity of the situation, and yet you found yourself tangled in the web of lies and deceit. You fled, hoping to escape the pressure, but you could not outrun the consequences of your actions. Cartwright opened his mouth to speak, but Poirot raised a hand to silence him. You will have your time, monsieur, to explain your part, but for now, it is the truth that must be uncovered. Poirot shifted his gaze to the others in the room. Each of you had your own reasons for keeping quiet, for remaining silent about what you knew. Some of you were afraid of the consequences. Others were complicit in the cover-up. But in the end, it is the truth that matters, and the truth cannot remain buried forever. He paused, letting his words settle in the air. The professor's disappearance was not an isolated incident. It was the result of a concerted effort by those who sought to control knowledge and power. And though some of you may have thought you could keep the truth hidden, it has now come to light. Lady Hawke stood abruptly, her face flushed with frustration. What do you expect from us now, Poirot? She asked, her voice tinged with anger. You've uncovered everything, and now you think we can just move on? Poirot remained seated, his expression unchanged. What I expect, madam, is that you face the consequences of your actions. The truth has been revealed, and justice will follow. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over the group. For a moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, the guests began to stand, their faces a mixture of resignation and guilt. They knew that the mystery had been solved, but the cost of their involvement was yet to be determined. Poirot stood and addressed them one final time. The truth is not always easy to accept, but it is the only path forward. You must all come to terms with what has happened, and in time, justice will be served. As he turned to leave, Poirot paused, glancing back at the group. Remember this, mesdames et messieurs, the truth may be hidden for a time, but it will always find a way to emerge. With that, Poirot exited the room, leaving the guests to face the consequences of their actions. The case was closed. The truth had been revealed. But for some, the journey toward redemption was only just beginning.